She stole my husband and married him. At my mother's funeral, she bragged about her mansion, but their faces went pale when, if you've ever been betrayed by the very person you trusted most, if someone took your entire life and still stood there, smiling as if they deserved every bit of it, then this story is for you. Before I tell you about the moment their faces went pale when they saw the man standing beside me that day, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe so you don't miss real stories about betrayal, awakening, and how a woman takes her life back without needing revenge. Because sometimes the greatest victory is living so well that the past no longer dares to look you in the eye. My name is Jessica Harper, and at 38, I'm standing in the family viewing room of the funeral home, smoothing the hem of my black dress for the 100th time, dreading the moment my sister Lauren walks in with the man she stole from me 6 years ago. The room carries the faint scent of lilies, furniture polish, and that unmistakable artificial floral fragrance funeral homes always use. My mother's photograph sits on an easel near the closed casket, Margaret Harper at 63, smiling with her eyes crinkled the way they did when she was genuinely happy, not just being polite. Pancreatic cancer took her life in just 4 months, from diagnosis to death so fast, we barely had time to adjust to the reality of it. The casket remains closed because the disease took too much from her in the final days, and no cosmetic technique could restore the woman we once knew. The room slowly fills with people from my mother's life. Cousins from New Jersey, her college roommate dabbing her eyes with tissues pulled from her purse. Neighbors from the quiet Massachusetts street, where my parents lived for 40 years. My mother was the glue holding our fractured family together. She grew up in a working-class neighborhood outside Boston, where everyone knew everyone's business and looked after each other's kids. And she built a life with my father in a modest but solid 3-bedroom colonial with a mortgage they finally paid off 3 years ago. She taught high school English until I was born, then poured her love for stories and language into bedtime rituals. Even after I moved into my own apartment in downtown Boston and built a career as a marketing director at a firm that helps mid-sized regional brands push into national markets, I called her almost every day. She knew the names of coworkers she'd never met and the dates of my biggest presentations. When I was promoted to senior account manager, she sent flowers to my office with a small card filled with her love. 8 months before the funeral, when she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had spread to her liver, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. We sat together in the doctor's office, fluorescent lights too bright, chairs too hard, posters on the walls explaining illnesses with cheerfully irritating diagrams, while a doctor younger than me used phrases like aggressive treatment, limited options, and palliative care in a voice trying to balance honesty and compassion, and failing at both. My mother squeezed my hand and nodded as if we were discussing a minor inconvenience, a delayed flight, not her approaching death. On the drive home, I sobbed so hard I had to pull over twice, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. From the passenger seat, she placed her hand over mine and said in the calm voice that got me through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks, "Jessica, we don't get to choose every chapter of our lives, but we do get to choose how we live them." Despite treatments, clinical trials, and special diets, we all knew her time was short. She faced the diagnosis with remarkable grace, more concerned about my father's blood pressure medication and my stress levels than her own pain. Her final weeks passed peacefully in the way people use that word when someone is dying. No dramatic suffering, just a gradual letting go, surrounded by loved ones in the home where she raised 2 daughters and tried her best to keep them from destroying each other. On a Wednesday afternoon, she passed quietly, her hand gripping mine, her final words barely audible. "Promise me you'll find peace. Not perfection, sweetheart. Peace." Those words echo in my head as I stand in the funeral home watching people arrive, knowing Lauren will walk through those doors any moment now, her arm linked with Connor Brooks like a trophy she won. 6 years ago, when I was 32 and thought I understood how life worked, My life looked perfect on paper, in the way that means nothing once the paper catches fire. I had the kind of career path people envied: 2 promotions in 3 years at Harrington and Associates, a six-figure salary, a corner office with windows. I had friends who showed up for wine nights and birthday dinners. I had a beautiful apartment in the South End with exposed brick walls and a view of the Charles River that made people gasp. But something was still missing. I worked 60 hours a week, ate too many prepackaged salads at my desk while reviewing campaign metrics, and dated occasionally, but nothing serious ever lasted. My relationships ended for reasons that were always vague and insurmountable at the same time. Bad timing, chemistry, wanting different things. All the phrases people use when they don't want to say, "You're fine, just not enough." Then I met Connor Brooks at a charity gala, one of those polished fundraisers for tech education nonprofits where people are either truly wealthy or pretending to be. The champagne is good, and the silent auction items range from Red Sox tickets to weekend getaways in the Hamptons. Connor Brooks was captivating in the way certain successful men tend to be, as if they'd been trained from a young age in the art of drawing attention without seeming to try. Dark hair styled to look effortlessly messy, but probably costing $200 to maintain. A suit that fit so perfectly it had to be custom made, and a confidence that filled the room without tipping into arrogance. At least, that's what I thought at the time. At 36, he had built the kind of success story business magazines loved. A small-town kid from the West who taught himself to code in high school, launched his first startup from his college dorm, sold it to a larger company for millions, then used the money to build another firm focused on disrupting corporate communications through a platform I never fully understood, despite his many attempts to explain it. "Jessica Harper," he said when a mutual friend introduced us, shaking my hand and holding my gaze just long enough to feel intentional. "A pleasure. Allison's told me about your work at Morrison and Klein. The Berkshire Foods campaign was brilliant, taking a regional dairy brand national in 18 months. How did you overcome the distribution challenges?" The fact that he'd researched me, knew my work, and could discuss it intelligently, the way he listened as I explained our strategy and asked follow-up questions that showed he actually understood, it felt like being truly seen after years of being glanced over. We felt an immediate connection, the kind I'd always imagined love would be. We talked for 2 hours about art, travel, and ambition, about wanting to build something meaningful beyond quarterly profits. He remembered details from our conversation and brought them up on our first date 3 days later at an upscale restaurant overlooking the harbor, with crisp white tablecloths, flickering candles, and a wine steward who pronounced every French word as if he'd invented the language himself. That night, I called my mother from the back seat of a taxi, slightly tipsy on champagne and full of hope in ways I'd forgotten I could feel. "I met someone special," I told her, and I could hear her smile when she replied, "He sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Just remember, even wonderful men are still human." Our relationship unfolded with an inevitable momentum, like a stone rolling downhill. Weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, where we walked the beach, ate lobster rolls, and talked about a future that included both of us. VIP concert tickets, where he held my hand during the slow songs. Intimate dinners where he brought thoughtful gifts. An autographed first edition of a book I'd once mentioned. A scarf from Paris because he said the color reminded him of my eyes. After 18 carefully cultivated months, during a private dinner on a yacht in Boston Harbor, with city lights glittering on the water like promises, Connor proposed with a 5-carat diamond ring. I said yes immediately. My parents were overjoyed. My mother immediately began collecting bridal magazines and imagining the perfect wedding with the enthusiasm of someone who had waited decades for this moment. Connor had the resources to make any wedding dream a reality, and my mother insisted we shouldn't hold back. "You've waited so long for the right person," she said, flipping through glossy pages at the kitchen table. "We're going to do this properly. Ice sculptures and champagne fountains, properly." But my younger sister Lauren, 2 years younger than me, was far more complicated. Growing up, we were close in the way sisters who share a bedroom, share a bathroom, and have a mother who constantly insists they be honest with each other, tend to be. But beneath that closeness, there was always a quiet competition, a scoreboard only Lauren seemed to keep. If I had one Barbie doll, she needed two. If I made a friend, she suddenly had to host sleepovers with that same friend. My mother tried to keep things balanced by giving each of us special time and individual praise. "You were my first miracle," she would say to me while we baked cookies. "You're my little firecracker," she'd say to Lauren during impromptu dance performances in the living room. But shared praise never erased the underlying rivalry Lauren quietly maintained. Despite everything, I chose Lauren as my maid of honor because my mother said it would bring us closer, and I wanted to believe we'd outgrown childhood jealousy. When I introduced her to Connor at a family dinner, she praised him effusively. "Connor, that tie is perfect," she said sweetly, actually touching the silk against his chest. "Jessica always had terrible taste until now." I noticed the way she touched his arm when she laughed at his jokes, leaned in closer when he poured wine. But I dismissed it as Lauren being Lauren. She had always performed when meeting new people, especially successful men, turning her charm up like a dimmer switch pushed to full brightness. We held our engagement party in my parents' backyard, string lights twinkling between the trees and centerpieces made from mason jars, because Pinterest promised that was elegant that year. Lauren helped my mother decorate, and throughout the evening I caught her watching Connor from across the lawn, her gaze lingering just a second longer than casual interest. But when our eyes met, she smiled quickly and raised her glass, softly saying, "I'm so happy for you." And I wanted to believe her so badly that I did. Later that night, after the guests had left and we were clearing paper plates and champagne flutes, my mother pulled me into the kitchen. "Jessica, sweetheart," she said carefully as she stacked glasses in the sink, "I noticed Lauren seems very taken with Connor. That's perfectly normal for someone who's about to gain a brother-in-law." "She's just being friendly, Mom," I replied, rinsing dishes. "Besides, she's dating that pharmaceutical sales guy, Brian something." My mother nodded, but her expression stayed uneasy. "Just be careful, my love. You know how your sister can be when you have something she wants." I hugged her and reassured her everything was fine. "We're grown-ups now, Mom. Lauren's genuinely happy for me." And I trusted the man I had chosen. I was wrong. So wrong it changed my life completely. 3 months before the wedding, Connor began to change in subtle ways that, taken individually, could be dismissed, but together were deeply alarming. He worked later, answered messages at odd hours with explanations about international clients in different time zones. Our Friday night dates were increasingly canceled because of urgent meetings, and those meetings seemed to multiply the closer the wedding got. When we were together, he was somewhere else, constantly checking his phone, only half present, his mind clearly elsewhere, even when his body was beside mine. More troubling was the way he began criticizing things he once said he loved about me. My laugh suddenly became too loud in restaurants. My favorite blue dress, which he once called stunning, now washed me out. My habit of reading before bed, something he used to find cute, became annoying because the light made it hard for him to sleep. Meanwhile, Lauren started calling more often to ask about wedding details. "I just want everything to be perfect for my big sister," she said in a syrupy voice that made my skin crawl. Even though my mother handled most of the planning, Lauren volunteered to attend vendor meetings I couldn't make because of work. "One less thing for you to worry about," she said when I thanked her. "Besides, Connor doesn't mind helping me choose between orchid arrangements and rose centerpieces." One Thursday evening, Connor and I had dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, where the pasta was handmade and the prices were almost offensively high. He barely looked at me, responding to my work stories with clipped words, while his phone buzzed nonstop on the white tablecloth. "Are you busy?" I finally asked, trying to keep my voice light even as irritation burned in my chest. "Sorry, it's just work," he muttered, flipping the phone face down. You know how things get before a product launch. That weekend, while doing laundry, a routine chore that would later become the source of so many discoveries, I noticed a strange perfume scent on Connor's collar. It was heavy, all soft citrus notes, completely different from the fragrance I wore. When I mentioned it, Connor didn't hesitate. Megan Carter, the potential investor I told you about. She wears a lot of perfume. She hugged me goodbye after the meeting. I wanted to shower immediately. The explanation sounded reasonable. I wanted to believe him, because love makes you generous and trusting in ways you would never be with yourself. 3 weeks before the wedding, during what was supposed to be an ordinary cake tasting appointment, Connor called that morning to apologize. Emergency with investors. Lauren can go with you. She knows my preferences anyway. I wondered, but didn't ask, how my sister knew my fiancé's cake preferences. At the tasting, Lauren displayed a troubling level of familiarity with what Connor liked. He'll want the bottom tier to be chocolate ganache, she said confidently to the baker. He hates fruit fillings. The texture bothers him. He told me he really loves lemon, I said, feeling the world tilt slightly. He changed his mind, she replied easily. We talked about it a few days ago. A few days ago, just the two of them, discussing cake. The next day, while cleaning out Connor's car before a dinner party, we'd taken my car the night before, and his was littered with the usual debris of a busy person. I found an earring wedged between the passenger seat and the center console. A dangling silver earring with a tiny sapphire that I recognized with the sick certainty of someone who had ignored obvious signs for far too long. Lauren's earrings. The exact pair my mother had given her for her 23rd birthday. She had worn them to my engagement party. That evening, when I showed Connor the earring, his expression didn't change at all. Oh, Lauren must have dropped it when I drove her to the florist last week. She mentioned losing an earring. You never told me you drove Lauren to the florist, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I must have forgotten. I guess I forgot. It's not important. When I called Lauren, her explanation matched his perfectly. So perfectly it felt rehearsed. That night I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying every suspicious moment like footage I could analyze for clues I'd missed. The late nights, the secret texts, the perfume, the earring, the synchronized stories, the way they both knew details about each other that couples only learn through time and attention. I started seeing a therapist without telling Connor, trying to separate anxiety from intuition, paranoia from pattern recognition. 3 weeks before the wedding, Connor suggested postponing it. I'm worried about you, Jessica, he said one night, his hand resting on my knee with a concern that felt slightly theatrical. You're not yourself anymore. Maybe we're rushing things. I broke completely, the last wall of denial collapsing. Just tell me what went wrong, I sobbed. Tell me what I did. Tell me how to fix it. He held me, murmuring vague reassurances while his eyes stayed distant. His embrace felt like an apology he didn't yet know how to say. That night, I woke at 3 a.m. and found Connor's side of the bed empty. I heard his voice from the guest room, low but urgent. Not now. She'll hear us. I know. Soon, I promise. The next day, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy, I decided to surprise Connor at his office with lunch from his favorite deli, the one that made the pastrami sandwich he loved using the exact recipe he had once spent 15 minutes describing to me. The security guard recognized me and waved me through with a smile. Mrs. Brooks-to-be, how's the planning going? Great, I lied and stepped into the elevator. On the ride up to the 12th floor, I studied my reflection in the mirrored walls, dark circles under my eyes, jaw clenched, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The lunch bag felt heavy in my hand, weighted with hope that there was an explanation, that I was being paranoid, that the man I loved wasn't betraying me. As I approached, Connor's assistant, Margot, looked up from her computer, her eyes widening with alarm. Jessica, we weren't expecting you. Her gaze flicked to Connor's closed office door, then back to me, worry written plainly across her face. "Connor's in a meeting," she added quickly. "He specifically asked not to be disturbed." "That's okay," I said, lifting the lunch bag. "I just brought food. I can wait." Margot stepped into my path. "Actually, he was very clear about no interruptions. Maybe I should let him know you're here first, and then he can—" "Is he alone in there, Margot?" Her hesitation said everything before her words could confirm my worst fear. Before she could answer, I stepped past her and pushed open Connor's office door. The sight burned itself into my memory like a persistent wound. Connor leaning against his desk, my sister pressed close to him, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck, their mouths locked together with the practiced passion of people who had done this many times before. Her dress hiked up, his tie loosened, the familiarity in the way their bodies fit together. When the door closed behind me, they sprang apart. Three faces frozen in a tableau of horror, an image that replayed in my nightmares for years afterward. "Jessica," Connor said, straightening his tie with steady hands, as if this wasn't nearly as shocking for him as it was for me. "This isn't what it looks like," he began, reaching for the oldest lie in human history. Lauren didn't even insult my intelligence. Instead, she lifted her chin with a defensive pride I recognized from childhood arguments. "It just happened." The stillness that washed over me was surprising, almost frightening in its completeness. It felt like stepping into a soundproof room where everything was sealed off and observed from a distance. "How long?" I asked, my voice calm despite my shaking hands. Connor glanced at Lauren, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Jessica, let's talk about this privately," he said, retreating behind his desk, as if furniture could shield him from the consequences of his choices. "How long?" I repeated. "Months," Lauren answered without hesitation. "Since the engagement party. From the very beginning. While I was planning our wedding, they were building their relationship in parking garages, offices, hotel rooms, and God knows where else. Half of our engagement had been a lie." Connor ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Feelings change sometimes. I was going to tell you—" "After what?" I cut in, anger finally breaking through the shock. "After the wedding? After the honeymoon? After you legally tied me to you while sleeping with my sister?" "I was trying to find the right time," he said, using the smooth tone he reserved for client meetings. The lunch bag slipped from my hand, hitting the carpet with a soft thud that sounded like an ending. "I trusted both of you," I said. "Both of you. I loved both of you. I planned a life with both of you in it." Lauren at least looked uncomfortable. "It happened, Becca. We tried to stop it." "Don't call me that," I said, my voice ice cold. That childhood nickname felt like another insult. "And nothing just happens for months on end. You made choices. Every secret call, every lie, every time you looked me in the eye knowing what you were doing. That was a choice." Connor reached for the intercom, already composed and ready to manage the situation. "Margot, please escort Jessica out. She's upset." "I'll see myself out," I said, gathering what little dignity I had left. "You deserve each other, truly. You both deserve exactly what you have." In the elevator, the tears finally came. By the time I reached my car, I was nearly choking on my sobs. The drive home is a blur. All I remember is calling my mother from the bathroom floor of my apartment, unable to form words through the crying. My parents arrived within an hour using the emergency key. My mother held me while I told them everything. My father paced back and forth, his face flushing red every time I went into detail. "I'll kill them," he muttered. "Both of them." "David, your blood pressure," my mother warned, even as anger showed clearly on her own face. The days that followed blurred into a haze of grief. My mother helped me cancel the wedding plans, her voice calm and professional, even as tears streamed down her face. My father handled the financial matters, reviewing contracts and clawing back deposits with the ruthless efficiency of a man trying to turn rage into something useful. When I returned the engagement ring to Connor's apartment, I left it with the doorman, unable to face him. I learned later that Lauren had moved her things in, her clothes in his closet, her toiletries in his bathroom, photos of the two of them displayed where my pictures had been just weeks earlier. The scandal spread through our social circle like wildfire through dry grass. Some people sided with me, others sided with Connor, citing his business influence and social connections. A few admitted they had noticed the flirting between Connor and Lauren, but didn't want to get involved, their cowardice hurting almost as much as the betrayal itself. My mother became my anchor during those dark months. She brought food when I couldn't eat, listened to the same anguished laments over and over, stayed overnight when the loneliness became unbearable. She tried to mediate between Lauren and me, inviting us both to family dinners that inevitably ended in tense silence or explosive arguments. At one such dinner, Lauren's resentment finally spilled over. "You always get everything first, Jessica," she said, her voice sharp with years of accumulated jealousy. "Grades, promotions, the apartment. This time, I got something before you." "My fiancé isn't a prize to be won," I shot back, my voice shaking with anger and pain. "He's someone I loved and trusted." My mother carefully set her plate down. "Lauren Marie, apologize to your sister right now." "Why?" Lauren fired back. "Honestly, Connor chose me. He loves me." I stood up so fast my napkin fell to the floor. "I can't do this anymore, Mom. I'm sorry." That was the last family dinner I attended with Lauren. My father's heart condition worsened under the strain of watching his daughters fight so viciously. My mother aged years in just a few months, the lines around her eyes deepening as she did everything she could to hold our family together with sheer will and good food. 6 months after discovering the betrayal, I fell into despair. A therapist diagnosed me with depression and recommended medication. My work suffered because I couldn't focus, and I eventually lost a major client after a disastrous presentation where I broke down in tears halfway through. My boss gently suggested a leave of absence, but I knew staying in Boston would only prolong my pain. When a marketing director position opened at our Seattle office, I applied immediately. The interview went well. Perhaps my desperation for change was mistaken for enthusiasm. 2 weeks later, I received the offer. My mother helped me pack, carefully wrapping photos and keepsakes in tissue paper. As we sorted through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate, she asked the question that had lingered unspoken between us. "Do you think you'll ever forgive Lauren?" "I don't know, Mom," I said, folding sweaters without looking up. "Maybe never." My mother was quiet, then pulled me into a tight embrace. "Promise you'll call. Promise you won't shut us out completely." "I promise," I whispered. Saying goodbye at the airport was harder than I expected. My father held me longer than usual, his voice rough with emotion. "Show them, sweetheart. Build a life so good they'll choke on their regret." Seattle felt both exhilarating and overwhelming. Glass skyscrapers and lake winds, strangers who knew nothing of my story. My studio apartment felt cold and temporary. I worked long hours to avoid the empty rooms, ate takeout at my desk, and collapsed into bed exhausted each night. Then, one Sunday morning, my mother called with news that cut even deeper. "Lauren and Connor got married yesterday." A small civil ceremony. That night was the worst of my life. I drank an entire bottle of wine alone, scrolled through old photos of Connor and me, and cried until my eyes were so swollen I couldn't open them. But when the morning light slipped through the curtains, something shifted. This would be the last day I let them control my happiness. I deleted the photos, blocked them on social media, took a shower and imagined the pain washing away. At work, I poured myself into projects with a new focus. My boss noticed and gave me bigger clients. I built a reputation for creativity and commitment. 4 months after moving to Seattle, I attended a tech conference in San Francisco. At a business dinner on Monday night, I was seated next to Ryan Bennett, a tech investor who had recently relocated from Seattle. Where Connor was flashy and performative, Ryan was quiet and genuine. His confidence drew people in without demanding attention. When he asked about my work, he truly listened, asking thoughtful follow-up questions that showed real interest. At the end of the night, he asked for my business card. I gave it to him without expecting anything. To my surprise, the next morning, he emailed, suggesting coffee before the first panel. For over 3 months, Ryan and I kept things professional, slowly easing into personal conversation. Eventually, he asked me to dinner, unrelated to work. I panicked, nearly canceled twice, but my mother's voice echoed, "Don't let what she did take more from you than it already has." 20 minutes into the date, while we were talking about favorite books, I suddenly had a panic attack, hands shaking, breath shallow, tears spilling. Ryan immediately moved to sit beside me instead of across the table. "You're okay. We can leave, stay, or just sit quietly. Whatever you want." He drove me home without pressing or questioning. The next day, flowers arrived with a note. "No pressure, no expectations. Just hoping you feel better." That night, I called him and told him everything about Connor and Lauren. He listened without interrupting, then shared his own story of betrayal. His wife had left him for a business partner, taking half of the company they built together. Over the months, we built a friendship first. Ryan never crossed my boundaries, always present without asking for more. When I panicked, he knew exactly how to help. Grounding exercises, gentle humor, and quiet presence. 1 year after moving to Seattle, I barely recognized my life anymore. Promoted to senior marketing director. A private office overlooking the river. Real friendships. And Ryan. Unlike Connor's flashy charm, Ryan's love showed up in quiet, steady ways. He remembered small details. Oat milk in my coffee. My favorite podcasts. He respected my independence while supporting me without hesitation. On a weekend trip to Michigan wine country, while we were walking through the gardens at sunset, Ryan stopped beneath a climbing rose arbor. When he knelt with the ring box, a flicker of panic crossed my mind, but his next words erased it. "You don't have to answer today. I just want you to know that whenever you're ready, tomorrow or next year, I'll be here." Tears spilled down my face, not from pain, but from being loved without conditions. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm ready." The ring was nothing like Connor's flashy diamond, a simple emerald surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and understated, just like our relationship. That night, I called my mother with the news. She cried with happiness. "He sounds wonderful! When do you introduce him to us?" "Soon," I promised. We planned a small wedding, 30 guests at a historic venue in Seattle. Our wedding day was warm and full of joy. My father walked me down the aisle and whispered, "I haven't seen you this happy in a long time, sweetheart." We bought a brownstone, renovated it together, built our careers side by side. I was promoted to vice president. Ryan's investment firm continued to grow, but Ryan remained my steady ground. Then my mother was diagnosed with cancer. We flew to Boston immediately to explore treatment options together. I took a leave of absence to care for her, temporarily moving back into my childhood home. In her final weeks, my mother kept urging, "Promise me you'll try to be there for Lauren. Life is too short to be so estranged." I promised, not knowing if I could keep it, but wanting to give her peace. When my mother passed, I called Lauren immediately. It was our first direct contact in years. "Mom is gone." She took a deep breath, then said, "I'll be there in an hour." The next day at the funeral home, I stood in the viewing room, dreading that Lauren would arrive with Connor. Eventually, the doors opened, and there they were. Lauren entered in an expensive black outfit, her diamond ring catching the light. Connor looked uneasy beside her. Her eyes swept the room until they found me, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. She walked over, tilted her head so the ring caught the light just right, and smiled with that cold smile only sisters can manage. Poor you, still alone at 38. 6 years of preparation condensed into that moment. I smiled back. feeling something unfurl in my chest like wings. "Have you met my husband?" Her expression shifted. "Husband?" "Ryan?" I called. He stepped to my side, tall and confident, genuinely glad to be there even at a funeral. When Connor's eyes landed on Ryan, he froze, eyes widening, then quickly smoothed his face into neutrality, as if seeing Ryan meant nothing. But his hands betrayed him. He rubbed them together twice. He only did that when he was nervous. "Bennett," Connor said, his voice tight. "Brooks," Ryan replied coolly. "How long has it been? 7 years? Not since you lost that bidding war." "You're married?" Lauren asked, her voice shaking. "2 wonderful years," I said, taking Ryan's hand. "Ryan Bennett," she repeated slowly, processing. "Of Bennett Capital?" "That's right," Ryan said pleasantly. Connor tried to recover. "Bennett, we should meet. Discuss potential collaborations." "My schedule's pretty full," Ryan replied. "Have your assistant contact mine." As the funeral director called us to begin the service, murmurs followed. The connection between Ryan and Connor was known in certain circles, and people were eagerly putting the pieces together. The funeral unfolded in both grief and unexpected calm. I delivered the eulogy, honoring my mother's kindness and resilience. When Lauren stood to speak after me, she managed only a few sentences before breaking down, tears streaming uncontrollably. When the last guests left to the hum of limousine engines and polite goodbyes, I stood alone on the steps and looked out over the city. Everything was the same. The familiar streets, the buildings that had watched me break apart. But I was not the same anymore, and that was enough. The day after the funeral, Lauren came to my parents' house alone. Connor was nowhere in sight. "May I come in?" she asked. In the kitchen, over coffee, she confessed everything. Connor had become controlling and critical after they married. His business was failing. The houses and cars were illusions propped up by mounting debt. "He monitors my spending, checks my phone, questions everything," she admitted. "The Connor you used to know doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did." "Why stay?" I asked. "Shame," she said immediately. "How could I admit that what I did to you was for nothing? And the prenup? If I leave, I walk away with almost nothing." Then Lauren gave a strained smile. "I saw the magazine article. You're really doing well." I nodded. There was something almost pitiful in her eyes. She looked like a woman who thought she was still holding a sword, only to realize it was made of wax. I glanced at her. "You know, I used to wonder what I'd say if we ever met again." Lauren shifted. I realized she probably didn't want to hear it. But I continued. "When I left here, I lost everything," I said softly. "And I still became richer, and found the love of my life." Then I turned slightly, my voice velvet soft, but steady. "You didn't break me. You set me free." That was the final line. I watched it land. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed. Her mascara trembled. "I don't forgive you," I added, "but I don't wish suffering on you either, because Mom wouldn't want that." That day, we spent hours together, going through our mother's things. "What will you do next?" I asked, as she prepared to leave. "I'll file for divorce when my lawyer says the timing is right," she said. "Rent a small apartment. Start over." The plane lifted off the runway in silence, so smooth it felt like the past had finally learned how to let go. I rested my forehead against the window, watching the city shrink below. Endless ribbons of lights, neighborhoods that once carried my name in memory, places that had held me in place with pain. They couldn't hold me anymore. The weight I'd carried for so many years slid off my shoulders, light as dust brushed from silk. Ryan sat beside me, already asleep, his head tilted slightly toward the aisle. Even in sleep, he radiated steadiness, safety. I looked at him and smiled. Not because of who he was in my life, but because of who I had become standing beside him. When the plane touched down in Seattle, the air filled my lungs, familiar and warm. Cold, but clean, honest. Like an old friend placing a hand on my shoulder and quietly saying, "You're home." The days that followed passed gently. One early morning, as sunlight just touched the kitchen windowsill, I stood very still in the bathroom, my hand trembling slightly as I looked at the test on the sink. Two pink lines appeared, clear and calm, without drama. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling my heartbeat slow. No fear, no doubt, just a deep, spreading sense of peace in my chest. When I told Ryan, he didn't speak right away. He just held me tightly, his forehead resting against my hair, as if holding both of us at once. No grand promises, no rushed plans, just a quiet whisper. "We'll be okay." Lauren and I didn't stay in touch, but I still heard about her through my father. She'd filed for divorce, moved into a modest apartment, found work at a small marketing firm. Public judgment was harsh, but she seemed determined to rebuild her life honestly. One evening, sitting in the nursery, watching Ryan paint the walls a soft blue, I thought about the path that had led me here, from Connor's office to Seattle, to Ryan, and to this moment. Losing Connor had felt like the end of everything, but it was actually the beginning of something far better. With Ryan, I found not just love, but a partnership built on truth instead of illusion. We were two whole people choosing to walk together, not one dragging the other along. Watching Ryan paint while humming off-key, I thought about the lessons I'd one day share with our child, about how loss can lead to finding, about how endings create space for beginnings, about how the hardest moments often guide us to the truest version of ourselves. 6 years ago, I never imagined I'd stand at my mother's funeral and watch Lauren try to hurt me with old tricks, only to realize those blows no longer landed. She thought that by taking my fiancé, she'd take everything from me. That was her mistake. Now I have peace. I have love. I have a life not built on someone else's suffering. I lost Connor and found Ryan. I temporarily lost my sister and found myself for good. And in that finding, I built a life worth living. Not in spite of the betrayal, but because surviving it taught me who I truly am beneath all the people-pleasing and desperate need for approval. That is the real victory. Not making Lauren and Connor jealous. Not having more money or a better life on paper. Holding a warm mug of milk. Watching him busy nearby. I opened an old notebook and wrote a letter I knew I'd never send. Thank you. Not for what you took from me, but for forcing me to face what had been cracked for a long time. Thank you for pushing me out of the safe circle I built around myself, where I stayed far too long just to keep things looking intact. Because of you, I had no choice but to choose myself, my career, my dignity, my life. I don't wish you well. I don't carry resentment either. I simply don't let that pain shape my future. Signed, the woman you thought you buried under betrayal, who stood up, worked, lived on, and turned the ruins into a stronger life. I closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and looked at the man who gave me a new life. This is happiness.